Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Richie. I'm the Director of Research at Bryant, and I'm going to be telling you about how we can fight factory farming with financial advocacy. So what is financial advocacy? Well, these are campaigns that aim to damage factory farming by targeting its funding. This includes pressuring shareholders, such as divestment. Has anyone heard of like a divestment campaign, the climate divestment movement? Okay, we've got a couple of people heard about that, brilliant. It also includes pressuring banks, government lenders, and insurers. And the goal here is to make it harder and more expensive for factory farming to borrow money, making it harder for them to expand and to build new factory farms, and hopefully damage them financially enough that they shrink and go out of business. So I'm aware that finance isn't everyone's favorite topic, and many of you won't know a huge amount about it, so just a brief 101 on how businesses raise money. So obviously businesses make profits, but when they want to expand, they often need access to large pots of money, so they raise it, right? Companies raise money in two main ways. The first thing is through like selling shares, which are like little chunks of the company. Or they do it through borrowing. So that can be from bank loans or by issuing corporate bonds, but we won't talk about them. Now, crucially, if investors and banks are confident in a company, then that means that the price of their shares will be worth more, and the loans to them will be cheaper. Much like when you get a mortgage, the bank will give you a better interest rate if you are a more reliable borrower. However, like conversely, if investors see a company as risky or unpopular, if their future is in doubt, then the share price falls and loans will become more expensive. So hopefully the only piece of jargon in the talk, this is what economists call the cost of capital. It is the cost that a business has to pay in order to get access to money to expand. So the idea here is that if we can paint factory farming as scandalous, as an environmental liability, as a pandemic risk, as liable to regulatory crackdown, then it can affect them financially. So investors get nervous about investing in them, right? They don't buy the shares, and because no one wants to buy the shares, the share price falls. And what that means is that when the company wants to raise new money, because their shares aren't worth very much, they just don't get that much for it. Similarly, banks might look at factory farms as risky investments, and if they do that, then they might still make loans, but those loans will have a higher interest rate, which will eat into the company's profits. And they might simply walk away from making a loan entirely. So the idea here is that what we want is that big meat companies have to pay more to borrow. When they raise shares, they don't get as much money, or they can't even raise money at all. So the question is, can we defund factory farming by increasing this cost of capital? So the first idea are divestment campaigns, right? What we're doing here is we are trying to convince shareholders to sell their shares in bad companies, right? And if enough people sell the shares, the price goes down, and companies can't raise new money. The best example of this is the fossil fuel divestment movement, where thousands of organizations, universities, pension funds, religious groups, companies have all publicly declared that they will no longer invest their large amounts of money in fossil fuel stocks. There's just one problem, which is that they don't seem to have worked, right? So despite thousands of institutions committing to divestment, the funding to the fossil fuel industry, from my reading of the economics research, there is currently no good evidence that the fossil fuel industry has had its funding negatively affected. In fact, one study looked at the 12 biggest fossil fuel divestment announcements in history. We're talking like billions of dollars sold off, and it did not affect the share price of any of these companies at all. Another paper estimated that we would need about 85% of all wealth in the entire United States would need to divest from fossil fuel stocks before the company started to experience any impact. Now, that is a monumental change that we're asking there. So the second idea are what are called lender pressure campaigns, right? This is targeting banks. Simple. Company needs a loan from a bank. We pressure the bank to drop the loan. The company starves, right? A prominent example of this is the Standing Rock Sioux Nation used this tactic in the fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline. So basically, this was an oil company wanted to build a big oil pipeline on indigenous lands. They obviously weren't very happy about that. They resisted, and one thing they did was campaign against the banks making the loans to the construction company to get them to drop that loan in the hope that it would stall the pipeline. Unfortunately, these also don't seem to work. The campaigns managed to successfully get 7 banks to back out. The problem is, these banks did not drop their loan. They basically sold their loan to other, less ethical banks. And this is a story we see repeated time and time again. It's the consensus in the economic literature that this is what happens. Basically, banks don't have to publicly disclose their loans, and so we actually don't even know which less ethical banks bought these loans, so we can't even campaign against them. So the key issue that the common thread running through these is that these campaigns live or die on one question. If we cut off this funding, will someone else step in to replace that funding, right? And in our global economy, the answer is almost always yes, sadly. So blame capitalism, I guess. So you might be thinking, okay, well, I came to this talk to hear about some exciting financial campaigns. I want to hit them where that hurts. Like, Jesus Christ, Richie, give us some good news. Does anything work? And so one thing that does work is campaigning against international development banks to stop them funding factory farming in the developing world. So the World Bank, the European Development Bank, and others, they fund factory farming in the global south, and they do that under the misguided assumption that it's good for food security, right? Something I don't have time to get into is that the way they make these loans, they tend to only make loans that the private sector doesn't want to make, and so what that means is that often they are the only people willing to make this loan. So if we campaign against them and convince them to drop the loan, there often isn't someone else to step in and make that loan. So for example, the Aguasarca Dam in Honduras, NGOs drew attention to the human rights abuses involved in the making of the dam, and that convinced the International Finance Corporation, which is an arm of the World Bank, to pull the funding. So not only did that loan not get replaced, a bunch of other commercial banks that were making loans around it also got cold feet and pulled out as well. And the dam never got built, which is brilliant. We've actually had a win in the animal movement as well through doing this. So a coalition of 200 organizations managed to get a $200 million loan to Brazilian beef giant Marfrig cancelled. Now, 200 million is actually not a huge amount for a company like Marfrig. However, it is a dent, right? We put a dent in a rapidly expanding industry. Okay, so we know that it can help in the global south, but most of us are campaigners here in the UK, in Europe. What can we do, right? Are divestment campaigns and bank lender pressure campaigns pointless? I would argue no. I think we should still be doing them, but we should change how we think about their benefits, right? I think they have 4 types of real but indirect benefits that I'm going to go through. So one is getting unique media attention. The second one is stigmatizing factory farming. The third one is movement building. And the fourth one is driving regulation. So number one, these campaigns get unique media reach. So defunding campaigns tend to get covered in financial and business outlets, often conservative outlets as well, that rarely report on animal advocacy. So we're talking about Bloomberg, we're talking Reuters, the FT, American Banker, right? These are outlets that basically never care about what we do. And so it can be very valuable to get the anti-factory farming message in these outlets, getting it in front of readers who don't typically see our message. So I did an analysis on the very few defunding campaigns that the animal movement has done, and I was really surprised to find that they are almost always reported positively in these outlets. Positively or neutral, almost like surprisingly little pushback, right? These campaigns are getting the anti-factory farming message into these outlets. So an example here is a piece by Jeremy Collar, and it's in Bloomberg UK, and it's an investor presses his case against industrial-scale farming. And the key thing here is the subcaption that's kind of hidden. It's about being a bad investment risk, right? It's not just about saying, oh, it's bad for the environment, it's bad for animal welfare, it's bad for your health, right? We know this, but it's also bad business, right? That's the narrative. And so the second one is stigmatization, right? So we're not just attacking factory farming on the standard grounds that we do. We are actually undermining its primary defense, which is its profitability. One of the reasons it's so difficult to get rid of factory farming is because as much as we can talk about the problems to health and to animal welfare and to pandemics and to food security and to, the list goes on and on and on, the thing that often people just collapse back to, the one excuse is that, yeah, but it makes money, right? Like, what are you going to do? It makes money. So by running these defunding campaigns, we can attack this essentially load-bearing wall of factory farming, which is to attack its profitability, to frame it as a bad business investment. And this is actually an indirect way we can affect the cost of capital. When investors think an industry is risky, they will demand more from those companies. They'll demand higher profits for a lower share price, and and banks will make less favorable loans. So this can translate into hurting access to funding. However, this tends to happen over the medium to long term. This is not a short-term thing, right? We shouldn't be looking weeks after our campaign to see if the share price is effective. It takes time. The third benefit is in movement building. So divestment campaigns have some really nice qualities in terms of building a broad-based movement against factory farming. So the fossil fuel divestment movement mobilized 1,500 institutions and countless grassroots campaigners. And later analysis has kind of found that it actually revitalized what was a struggling, sluggish climate movement at the time, right? So a lot of people said it was getting harder and harder to get students and to get young people and to get general people on the street involved in the climate movement, but divestment gave them a way to get involved, right? And we can do that for the fight against factory farming, right? We can bring in people who aren't necessarily vegans or animal rights activists, but all of you have a pension. Well, most of you probably have a pension, right? Your parents have pensions. Your cousin has some investments. Your auntie might do their banking with Barclays, right? Everyone has concrete connections to the targets of these campaigns, and that can be a way that we can get people involved. Also, these are concrete targets, right? Barclays is on the high street, right? So we can run campaigns against them. And these campaigns have also been very good at building coalitions with other adjacent social movements. So, for example, food sovereignty organizations, human rights groups, environmental NGOs, the kinds of alliances that we need to be making to punch above our weight and extend our reach beyond just the wonderful but overstretched vegans in this room. So the last one is the pressure for regulation. So financial campaigns can be a strong sign to policymakers that the public cares about an issue, right? The fossil fuel divestment movement, though it didn't affect the access to money of fossil fuel companies, it directly inspired Ireland's net zero pledge in 2021. It set the stage for quite a lot of pro-environmental regulation, right? It has built, and quite famously, anti-apartheid divestment campaigns, though they didn't hurt South African companies, they actually set the stage for government economic sanctions on South Africa, which eventually toppled the regime. Get the picture. So, some other promising directions I don't have time to go into that we could explore as a movement. One is insurance pressure campaigns. So the first one is factory farms can't operate without insurance. If you can pressure an insurer to not insure a factory farm, they can't open. And this has started to work in the climate movement. We see more and more coal plants that are finding it impossible to get insurance. And also the Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty campaign famously used this. The Huntington Life Sciences became uninsurable, basically, as a result of their activism. The government had to step in. The next thing is shareholder activism. This is could be a whole talk in itself. Basically, you're buying shares in a company, and that gives you permission to show up at their meetings and basically force them to make changes, right? You can evict their board if you try hard enough. We've had no real major wins with it yet, but the academic literature suggests that it can work, and there are some people attempting. So I think if we push on that, it can work. So in conclusion, how do we run these campaigns well? So firstly, my takeaway from reading dozens and dozens of dry economics and finance papers is, wait for the good news, none of you need to read them, right? None of you need to care about any of those things. Don't worry about this cost of capital type stuff. Don't worry about share prices and corporate bonds and all this, that, and the other. What you need to be doing is use these defunding campaigns as a vehicle for what really makes change, right? Which is getting stigmatizing media coverage, specifically that paints factory farming as risky business, as a bad investment. We want to get it in conservative and financial outlets. They will report on it, and they won't hate us. We can use these campaigns to build a broader base movement, to engage people who don't normally engage with our campaigns. And we can also, once we've got that broad base appeal, we can then hopefully translate that into supporting regulation asks, right, and getting regulation in. And lastly, if we want to stop factory farming in the global south, we should support campaigns against development finance banks. So who's working on this? Not many people. We need more people working on this, but here are a shout out to some of these organizations. So we have the Stop Factory Farming Coalition, working on all sorts of things. World Animal Protection has been a leader in this. Synergia Animal has been pivotal in campaigning against the World Bank. The Accountability Board by Josh Bulk is trying shareholder activism. We've also got Rory Cardy over there, he's starting a thing called Bank for Nature, so talk to him about that. That's all about pressuring your local bank. We've also got Food Rise UK. They're not a vegan org, but they are like closely allied to our movement, and they're really, really great. They've been working on UK divestment campaigns. And lastly, we have the FAIR Initiative, which is run by Jeremy Collar, and that is all about basically giving investors the facts on factory farming as being risky business, right? It's like by investment professionals for investment professionals. And that's it. Thank you very much.